It is a very interesting question how four such very large companies came from such a very small town.
It was somewhat on a shoestring. When you come from a small town, you have to figure things out on your own.
That was the beginning of the transportation business that we know now.
Trucking is really hard work.
Your goal was just survival.
I had no idea that we would grow into what Swift ended up being.
He was the hardest charger I have ever seen.
We're going to make it. We're going to do it big.
There's a certain competitiveness between all of us, but there's also a certain closeness.
You get it done. You know, there's a will, there's a way. Just figure it out and get it done.
We'll just outwork.
Somebody's got to haul it, and we're going to be there.
I'd like to introduce to you Dan England, Chairman of the company. Well, good morning, everybody. As was indicated, my name is Dan England. I'm the chairman of the company here. But more importantly, I'm part of the third generation of this business. And my generation took over in the early 80s. And myself and my three brothers, Dean, Todd, and Corey, ran the business for 30, 35 years, something like that. And now my sons are now running the business. I have four sons. And my dad, who is here in the building today, he's the second generation of business, and he's 101. Wow. And yeah, he's going strong. He was just telling me about a couple of trips he's going to take, and with his wife. He keeps outliving his wives, including my mother, but he's going strong. Hi, Dad.
Hi, Dan.
You doing well today?
You bet.
Okay.
Pretty well.
Good. All right. Well, I'm going to lunch, so I'll see you later.
Okay.
Okay.
Take care.
Bye.
Gene England's recently had a birthday, and he's turned 102 years old.
Love that guy.
He's alert and vibrant and full of energy. He's the second generation of the C.R. England family. Gene's father was C.R. England, Chester, who started this company back in 1920 when he bought his first Model T truck.
He's amazing. I mean, he could live another who knows how long. He may outlast me, but he just has a way of keeping himself focused.
I'm just kind of amazed at him. Plain City, Utah. What's so significant about Plain City, Utah?
It is a very interesting question how four such very large companies came from such a very small town.
Three families who all knew each other formed four of the largest trucking companies in the United States. C.R. England is the first company. It's family owned for 4 generations, and it's the largest refrigerated carrier in the country. They have grown to over 9,000 employees and $1.1 billion in annual revenue. Pride Transportation, family operated with 700 employees and $126 million in annual revenue. Their namesake is meant to symbolize the pride that they take in their work as they operate some of the finest and most environmentally friendly equipment on the road. Swift Transportation, founded by the Moyes family. Through aggressive internal growth and many acquisitions, Swift became the largest carrier in North America by the 1990s, just shy of 30 years after they were founded. Nye Transportation, Founded by 4 Knight cousins who split off from Swift and ranked by Forbes as one of the best small businesses in the United States for 12 consecutive years. Following their merger with Swift, they became the largest carrier in the world with 22,000 employees, $4.67 billion in revenue.
How did Plain City catapult 4 giant trucking companies? You know, I don't have a great answer for that.
I'll give you what Jerry always told us. He said, number one, there must have been diesel in the groundwater. And number two, he thinks that we were all conceived in the back of an 18-wheel sleeper. It could have been predestined, I don't know.
I think it's in the water, but there's something, obviously there's something else there.
When you look at Plain City, it's a breeding ground for industry like I've never seen.
But I think because of the culture of Plain City and the closeness of the families, it gave everybody a really good opportunity.
Just something about it out here has been bred in all of us, being a farming community.
When you grow up in a small farming community, you kind of learn how to survive. And so you kind of just have to figure it out on your own. When I think about that, that's really had a significant impact on all 3 of these families.
Of course, our parents were great examples to us and taught us how to work hard, to be honest.
You know, we were taught how to work hard and work smart. You know, probably a little more hard than smart back in those days, but you know, we had a good work ethic.
4 companies, 3 families, friends for generations. The Englands, the Moises, the Knights. Why Plain City? Here's their story.
Life in Plain City was awesome.
Most everyone was a farmer. There wasn't really anything else to do.
We cut asparagus. I milked cows when I was 14.
If we wanted to get ahead, we needed to work. We believed that we had plenty of opportunity if we would just go after it. It was just a great small town, and you knew everybody, and everybody knew you.
It was like a big family. And so the Knights and the Englands grew up together.
Chester and Maud, they met in the the church social circles.
My grandma and my granddad, they went to church together, they went to school together. There was only one classroom in it, and all the different grades were in the same class. And so all those kids at that time knew each other pretty good. And that was the basis of their relationship over the years.
In 1917, 18 years of age, Maud Vivian Knight and 19-year-old Chester Rodney England get married.
After they had been married for a very short time, it was like weeks maybe, Granddad received a mission call from the church.
He departed just 2 or 3 weeks after they had been married. Awfully hard to start off a marriage relationship with the husband absenting himself for 2 years, and that's what happened.
When he came home after 2.5 years, Grandma got influenza, and she was quarantined for some weeks. And so they saw each other through a window in that latter part when she had the influenza.
All of a sudden, their parents and Jean was the first.
Chester at the time was still farming.
But after 1 year of farming, he decided farming wasn't for him.
he indicated that he just couldn't make enough money to support his family in farming.
Most of the people at that time, they probably had horse-drawn wagons and so forth that they would take their goods. The nearest market was Ogden.
Chester gets an idea, which he confides to Maud. With their savings as startup capital, they could create a transportation service from Plain City.
My grandmother was a very conservative person. She didn't do anything without a lot of thought.
Granddad, he tended to be, well, he was kind of a rambunctious entrepreneur, and there was always a lot going on around him, and it could be mostly chaos.
Chester was so much like my grandfather, like they were both characters.
And my grandma kind of brought some organization to all that chaos.
Grandma was probably a little hesitant financially if he was going to be successful.
After a year of penny pinching, Chester and Maud exchanged their savings for a new Model T truck.
My dad was the hometown trucker. In 1920, he bought a Model T Ford truck and started buying produce from the local farmers and marketing in Ogden, feeding his family with a truck.
Well, I'm not sure that just looking at him or seeing him would really impact you as to what his mindset is.
He was always looking for a deal of some kind. But when Weber Central Dairy started processing milk, Dad was their first contractor to haul the milk from the farm into the processing plant in Ogden on 25th Street, up above 25th Street. He would have his truck loaded with empty cans in the morning, and he would go start with the farmers, and he would pull a loaded can out of, they would usually keep it in a water tank where the animals drank. When they milked, they would put the can with the milk in there to cool it. And he'd come and fish the can out of that tank, leave them an empty for tomorrow, and carry it on to the dairy. And I remember going with him on that trip lots of times. He was my hero from day one. The economy was very, very tight. Money was just hard to get a hold of.
He was a guy that wouldn't give up. He's gonna make it work. Whatever he chooses to do, he'll make it work.
Even though times were tough, Chester continued to buy new trucks every year and find ways to make money.
He was truly a worker and trying to provide for his family, which was his number one concern, is to provide for his family.
Even though it was tough going, it was hard. He always looked at the day for a new experience. We're gonna make it. We're gonna do it big.
He had an appetite for industry and business like nobody I've ever seen. You talk about somebody who truly was entrepreneurial to the core, that was Chester England. Well, Chester England gave that to his sons.
3.5 years behind me came my brother Bill.
You have never seen a person who was so proud of his sons, my dad and Bill.
And he'd always say, well, this is my son, and he's the best. He was able to build their self-esteem. I mean, they loved to be with their dad anyway, and so that was just a little thing that helped cement that relationship.
Chester taught his sons everything they needed to know about business from a young age.
At age 14, the state of Idaho put out a driver's license for boys that were 14 years of age because they needed the boys to drive on the farm up there. So I got an Idaho driver's license at age 14, and I was then running the truck, making deliveries. I had learned from Dad how to do it, how to price the product and how to write the invoice and figure the cost, and everything was done in cash. Bill was, I guess he was a little bit of a nuisance as a young kid. Young kids usually are when teenagers aren't trying to do things, but that didn't last long. We became so close. When I was 14, he was 10 and a half. He'd go with me.
They were together all the time.
And that was the way it was all through our life. We loved each other. We never had a serious disagreement.
Bill and Jean were unbelievable. They worked together their whole life and cared for each other their whole life.
That's the way it was.
The outbreak of World War II obviously affected most everybody's life in the U.S. It was also a concern, I'm sure, with my granddad about the what effect that would have on their business.
The war came along, World War II came along, and my dad and my uncle were drafted into the military service. My dad took advantage of his cigarette rations that was given to everybody if they wanted them. I suppose some didn't want them, but my dad saw an opportunity there to take those cigarettes and sell them to those that wanted them. And he saved that money. He saved $5,000 during that. That was a lot of money in those days. And it allowed them to make a down payment on a new truck.
After the war, my granddad renamed the company to C.R. England and Sons.
Yeah, obviously that was a motivation, and it was a great thing for them to be a part of what my granddad started.
Even though it was, over 20 years old, it was still just a tiny speck of a business. Nevertheless, they had big dreams and ideas about what was to come.
The three of them, they were a team that were not going to be put down. They were going to find success no matter what, and they did over those years.
When we came back from the service and started doing this transcontinental trucking, we were allowed to haul exempt commodities only.
And in the business, they were doing like what a lot of other people did, is transporting goods kind of regionally around the U.S. and going California and back, and maybe to Texas and back.
Then in the 50s,
they recognized a real market for goods on the East Coast, and it was a market that not a lot of people were participating in.
at that time there was not a lot of coast-to-coast service.
And so they found that niche and they went with it big time.
The first truck we sent to the East Coast went into Boston with a load of produce. Then we connected with Safeway stores out there, and we hauled their fishery products west.
Also, as a part of that, they offered 72-hour service from coast to coast, which was unheard of at that time. And so everybody looks to distinguish themselves in some way, and that's how they look to distinguish themselves, and it worked.
And that's really the foundation of where England's have gone now. They cover the whole country. Any major city, you're going to find a Sarah England truck there.
And then we developed customers everywhere we could. But it was all done without hauling the real good freight, the freight that paid more money. That was the beginning of the transportation business that we know now.
And then all of Gene's sons come along.
I worked in the business from just a young boy, whether it was washing trucks or servicing trucks, loading and unloading trucks.
Before I drove a car, I drove a truck. And it was my granddad who put me in that seat, taught me how to drive a truck.
My dad, my uncle, all the kids, in some way we were all involved in trucking.
Every time I could take one of those boys with me when I was still driving, it was the greatest time of my life, and they loved it just like I loved to be with my dad. They loved to be with their dad, and so.
You know, everybody knew we were in trucking, and I took pride in the fact that we were.
He'd been operating by himself for a lot of years while Dad and Bill were getting their school behind them and then their military service. However, he also took advantage of some friends in Plain City, one of which was Carl Moyes, Jerry's dad.
Carl worked for us, and Carl and his wife Betty, and June and I, my wife at that time, we'd been friends all of our life. We were school friends.
Dad and Gene used to drive trucks together, and they were very, very good friends early on, as well as later on as they both developed families.
Carl and Betty Moyes, they were the parents of Jerry and Ronald and Patrice.
Jerry was, he was just a year younger, I think, than Jeff, my son. So they were friends.
One of the key things that I remember was doing a lot of boating and water skiing with both the Knights as well as the Englands.
Carl Moyes, after a while, concluded his work with CR and decided to start his own company with his wife Betty, called BC Truck Leasing.
Well, back in those days, there was what was called the Interstate Commerce Commission, and you had to have ICC authority to basically haul anything, and they did not have ICC authority, so one of the ways around it was what's called one-way truck leasing. And so BNC Truck Leasing was a one-way truck leasing company, and that's what started that, is the lack of ICC authority.
This company quickly found its niche. Carl Moyes drove between Arizona and Southern California, bringing steel to Arizona and bringing cotton to California.
I think they was, excited to have me on board and worked me to death, but that's all right, so.
Jerry was, he was always a great kid, and then immediately you saw that he wasn't afraid of anything. Give me opportunity.
In 1966, Jerry buys an old beat-up truck from his dad and departs from Plain City down to Arizona.
Dad was hauling a little bit of steel for a gentleman out of Los Angeles named Jerry Goodell, and he come in the office, the shop in there one day, and said, Carl, I'm mad at my trucker, and 80% of my business is in Arizona, and if you'll move to Arizona, I'll give you my business down there. And Dad said, I'm not moving to Arizona, it's too hot down there. Here's Jerry. So this Jerry Goodell, who was a very aggressive individual, he looked at me, and I was sitting in a chair, and he said, well, how much money you got, boy? And I said, well, I have $5,000. And I was very proud of that. He says, okay, I'll put in $5,000 and we'll go 50-50 partners, and you can rent one of your dad's trucks and get down there tomorrow and get started. So that's kind of where it all got started. So, and that was a company called Common Market Distributing.
He took it and blew it up and made it big.
I mean, you had to work, and that's the way it was, and there was no other way.
After Jerry moved to Arizona, he buys a small fleet of trucks, and Swift Transportation is born.
Jerry Moyes is a guy who's shaken up this industry.
Jerry was always a growth engine.
From the time he started taking over the business from his dad, he just was go and blow the whole way.
He's just a visionary. He is always thinking ahead.
He was the hardest charger I have ever seen. Like, if you told him he couldn't do something, he was gonna do it.
He'll dig into a problem, and that unique ability that he has, he listens very well. When you think he's not paying attention, he's paying attention.
He's really made a name for himself in the industry for all the things he's accomplished, for his growth, for his influencing market.
I just think of him as one of the great leaders that have built America, quite honestly.
I always had confidence in not only myself, but my team. I had, really good people around me. And
Yeah, it's very important to Jerry that people work and that they have that job opportunity and that they're able to take care of their family.
even later as I was building Swift, I went back up to Plain City and got a lot of good people to come down here and work for us. So.
About 10 years into Swift's existence, Kevin Knight comes into the picture. Jerry is in his early 30s by now, and Kevin was this 18-year-old kid right out of high school.
And so that's how I ended up in the trucking business, was went to the Moyes family and said, hey, I'd like to go to work for you if there's an opportunity.
Well, we brought the Knights in. I think Randy originally moved to Los Angeles with my brother. He was closer to my brother in age. And
Randy was the first that got involved in the trucking industry. I always looked up to Randy and Gary. They were our older cousins. And he went to work for Jerry and Ronald's dad, Carl.
Kevin had tried to go into business with his best friend at the age of 16, but the venture was not significantly profitable.
I had a son and I got married to Sydney and I needed a job, and I felt like it was a good time for me to move on. I didn't even ask what I was getting paid. I didn't ask if I had benefits. I just needed a job. And hey, it wasn't a very good job. I was working out in the yard, and it's gonna be 117 here next week, and it was hot back then too. But I loved the people that I worked with. Gary and I came at the same time.
They were very smart individuals and were used to working hard.
And then my brother Keith was serving a mission in the Philippines, and then when he finished that, he and his wife came to Arizona, and we ended up just all working together. When I came to work there, just had wonderful examples and wonderful leaders. Of course, Jerry was there, Kevin was already there, Gary was there, and so was Randy.
In the beginning of our careers, we were just working really day by day, week by week, and month by month, and then quarter by quarter and year by year.
It was a business that was in some ways very archaic. It wasn't very modern, it wasn't very advanced. If you were in the trucking business, your goal was just survival. Especially the way we started, the way the Moyes family started, the way the Knight family started, it was somewhat on a shoestring.
Well, one of our biggest problems up until 1990, so from 66 to 90, we was growing a very capital-intensive industry with no money. And it was very, very difficult.
We weren't overly financially stable.
We had to make sure the load got picked up and delivered and hurry and invoiced and hurry and got it collected. And we had drivers standing around waiting to get paid. And a lot of times we had to tell the driver, here's your check on a Friday, but don't cash it till Monday. And, it was just very, very difficult from a financial standpoint, for the first 24 years of getting started. So.
Now the Englands, on the other hand, they were well established, and they were ahead of us, and they were a very looked up to family. Like, I can remember thinking about the Englands and thinking, I don't know if we'll ever get there, but I sure hope we do someday. And we had to piece our operations together. The Moyes family and the Knight family. What I learned in those early years was what we don't have in smarts, or what we don't have in capital, we'll just outwork everybody. And in the end, it worked. I remember the first day I walked into Swift, I had never seen 2 telephones on anybody's desk. I'd never seen that before. And Jerry had 2 telephones on his desk, and I thought, gee whiz, this guy must be really important. And I didn't really even understand why there were 2 telephones until I walked by a little later, and he had one on this shoulder, and then he had another one, and he was talking to a driver and talking to a customer at the same time, and trying to make the plan come together. I mean, we didn't have computers, we didn't have any of those kinds of things, but it was like, there was just something that got me. Like, you know, this is business at its best. Like, you have these wonderful truckers and people that are making all this freight move, but then you've also got these customers that are the biggest and the best in the world, and it just sucked me in, and so I remember thinking, I've got to get educated a bit. And so I took a semester at Glendale Community College. I took a class in accounting, I took a class in small business, and that was the end of my college career. But it really helped me see that the way my mind was thinking was the right way to think, because it lined up with the education of those 2 classes. I just kind of said to myself, I'm going to have to figure this stuff out on my own. And so I became a voracious reader. And everything I could read on this industry, I read. Everything our competitors were doing, everything our customers were doing, everything anybody was doing to try to get ahead. Every day I would learn more, get better at it. I just loved our industry. And really, at that time, I didn't say to myself, hey, we need to go start Knight Transportation. I just said to myself, we just got to be the best we can.
Kevin learned the business immediately. And so he was just another entrepreneur out of Plain City.
Meanwhile, while Kevin, Gary, and Keith Knight were working for Swift, the Englands continued to grow rapidly.
Well, prior to 1980, every company had to have operating authority to haul whatever goods they hauled. You'd go through all this effort of getting shippers to support you, to apply to the Interstate Commerce Commission, to have authorities granted to haul the goods you wanted to haul. And it turned out to be just like a trial, just like a big trial, where you'd have witnesses that would come and testify as to why they needed you, why they needed CR England to haul these goods, and why other companies weren't doing it as well as they needed them to.
A lot of carriers that were protesting us. They didn't want us to get anything.
And so you'd go through days of trial.
My son, Dan, he became a transportation attorney.
It wasn't certain that I would be going back into trucking. It ended up that I was doing a lot of legal work for the company. I was the one who was doing all that. And so it got to the point where in the law firm, most of my billable hours were to CR England. And so it eventually just was a pragmatic decision that I'm working almost 100% for CR England. I might as well work for CR England. And so I eventually decided to come back to work for the company, and that was in 1977.
I felt this need to do my own thing. And that started in probably early 70s, because I bought my first truck. When I bought my first truck, I called it Pride of England Enterprises. And during the period when I bought three more trucks, they were called Pride of England. Well, when I made my decision to move on, that's what it said on the truck, was Pride of England. And so people looked at that as still part of CR England. And so that's when we changed it, just shortened it down to Pride. And the story goes that I was prayerful about this situation. My wife thought I was nuts, leaving the fold. I had a spiritual experience, if you will, with our church. We have a blessing that you can receive that will maybe give you some direction in your life. And most members of the church have that earlier in their life, but we never had our blessing in that regard, and so we decided to do that. And in that blessing, it just simply said, you will go out in business on your own. So if we believe and have faith in what the basis for that information, then it was the right thing to do. So, and she was shocked, if you will, and but so she knew then that that was the will. Ultimately, I made that move in 1979.
When I first heard that Jeff was leaving the company, my initial reaction was surprise. On the other hand, I guess I shouldn't have been quite so surprised.
Jeff's such an individualist. It was really destined, in my opinion, because he wanted the trucks to be a certain way.
He was, in a lot of ways, a lot more like my dad in terms of hands-on with the equipment. Whereas I love trucking, he loves trucks.
Jeff loves to drive, and I've just admired that. And his dad was the same exact way.
I think we created a culture that works on relationships with drivers and non-drivers, and it can show in your whole operation, your trucks, your people, and so it seemed to be a good fit.
Jeff's the one I ended up being the closest to. I would consider him my best friend in the trucking business. Dan's a close second, I gotta be honest.
I mean, everybody loves my brother Jeff. We've always been friendly competitors in spite of the fact we basically do the same things. So I've always been proud of what he's accomplished over there, and I think he's been very proud of what we've accomplished. So it's been a great relationship and continues to be.
It's been good. No problem at all.
In 1979, I can't remember if it was 78 or 79, we received a grant for nationwide General Commodities Authority, which is the broadest authority you could have. We could haul anything, anywhere. And that was a real triumph for us, but then a year or two later, in 1980, the industry was deregulated, which meant that anybody could haul anything. And so the first thing everybody did was reduce rates. And so rates went down. And those were very difficult years from 1980 to 1985. So many trucking companies were failing because the rates had dropped so much because of this infusion of all this competition. And of the top 100 trucking companies in 1980, fewer than 10 of them are still in business. And that was a real time of challenge in this industry.
A few years after Jeff's departure from CR England, Kevin and Gary Knight start toying with the thought of splitting off from Swift Transportation and starting their own trucking venture.
We'd been at Swift for 15 years.
There was a lot going on.
The trucking industry was growing. We'd went through what's called the deregulation phase.
Swift had become a very successful business under Jerry's leadership, and with the help of the Knights, and Swift was a company that was going public, things were changing. I know for me personally, it was a time of reflection. I was experienced enough now in this business that I wanted to be better.
We just wanted to make it a little more simple operation. You know, one type of truck, one type of trailer, and we were kind of modeling our business a little after a company called Heartland Express.
But it wasn't like it was this grand plan to leave Swift. At that point in time, Randy had already left Swift, and Jerry's brother Ronald, he was gone also. So Swift was getting ready to go public.
What ended up happening is we started to talk openly about it with Jerry, and then it took on a life of its own.
It wasn't like it was, hey, we're going to go do this. It was like it just worked its way there. Yeah.
So in 1990, we decided to leave Swift and start Knight.
The Knights left right. The negative of the Knights leaving was it was right in the middle of our IPO, our initial public offering, and they were very key people in the operation. We'd already been interviewed by some investment banking firms, and they took part in it, and so their departure delayed us, I think, about 90 days in our initial public offering. But you know, the positive is we had a lot of very, very good people that were ready to fill our seats, and we had to move a few people around. Some people from Los Angeles come over here, and but you know, we got through it, and as you know, we probably didn't miss a beat, really.
Swift went on and continued to thrive, and I'm so glad.
We got, I think, $34 million out of Wall Street to put into the company, and that gave us the capital to really start growing. And from that time, from 1990 to, let's say, 2015, the next 25 years, we grew to, you know, $4.7 billion.
During the 1990s, when this split took place, the town was all abuzz, and they wondered if the families were going to get along, if things were going to be amicable between them. And it was really interesting to sit and watch all that.
Those two families are best friends going back generations. And so that part of it was really difficult because you were trying to start a company, and on the same token, it's like you'd lost your best friend. And I have a great appreciation for how it felt for both families.
Well, it really did shake it up, and I never felt bad personally. I mean, I figured, hey, it's the American dream, and they want to go out on their own, and they had earned what they had achieved, and so I never had a problem with it. Now, my mother and some other people and my sister, they had big problems with it.
My mom was very close with Jerry's mom and Jerry's sister, Patrice and Betty, and in the end, everybody kind of got into it and understood and got behind it, and you know, off we went. The Knight family left, 4 of us and others. Day one was quite odd. It was the first time in our trucking careers that we didn't have any trucks. We didn't really have anything except for each other. We started with nothing, and you know, and then went to work on building a trucking company that had part of Swift, but also part of Heartland, and that's what became Knight. Randy had left Swift a few years prior and had a warehousing business, and we went to his office and we put a few desks in there, and that's basically where we worked. We just shared the space. It was just a 3 or 4 month period of really hardening our plans, getting equipment ordered, starting to hire employees. You know, we hauled our first load in July of 1990. When we were into our business, we were prepared. we had experience, we had knowledge, we had common sense. And so when you have all of that, that's where the confidence comes from.
So I don't think I ever really was real nervous, just because with Kevin and Gary and Randy and you know, other people that we knew were going to work for us, I just felt that we would be okay. Not in a boastful way, not thinking that, but just more maybe in a confident manner, that we just felt if we put all of our efforts together, that we could run a really good company.
Keith and Gary and Randy and I are different.
We each have certain qualities, you know, and we were able to, you know, play off the strengths of each other. And, you know, and the good thing is we're not greedy. Nobody sought after titles and when we set the company up, it was all a fourth. It was set up very fair.
Deregulation hit our industry in 1980. We started Knight in 1990, so we were 10 years behind. And there were already big names in the truckload business that were way ahead of us. And in order for us to kind of catch up, I felt like we had to be a public company. We needed every advantage we could have, and access to capital, especially if we had a really good business that people believed would grow, would give us the ability to get solidly in the game.
And when you go public, typically that means you're telling Wall Street that, hey, I'm going to grow, because being profitable just doesn't cut it with those guys. They want profitability and they want growth.
That was a pretty big step, a bold step, but yet, knowing Kevin, I just knew that they were going to make it work.
In 4 short years, Knight Transportation goes public. The Knights at this time are quickly becoming an influential carrier.
I never thought, now Kevin probably did, okay? I mean, that's just how Kevin thinks. I don't think I ever thought we would be like we are today. Not like this. Now maybe I thought we'd get up to a couple thousand trucks, but not to you know, where we are today.
Kevin Knight, I've always admired him and in his ability to run an extremely successful business.
People love him. They can't help it. And what a break that gives him in running his business, when people love to work for you.
We're not in the same generation. I'm much older than Kevin, but we just have a bond, and it's hard to explain. I think it's that entrepreneurial spirit coming through again in Kevin, like it was in my dad and my granddad before him, and even my great-granddad before him. So we have that same gene, I guess, in there that kind of brings us together. The trucking business in those years was getting more sophisticated. In other words, technology was coming in. But, I mean, I was more or less operating by the seat of my pants. I was more concerned about how good the trucks looked rather than really concentrating on bottom line, if you will. I wasn't quite as focused on it as Jay came to be.
Jeff's son, Jay England, decides to get a degree in business administration. His new expertise allows him to remedy Pride's financial difficulties.
He now has a real handle on the business. Today we know what we're doing tomorrow. It's such a change from his high school days. He'd go to school and he'd sit in the corner and wouldn't do anything. But the education made such a difference in him. He's so professional. I go sit in these management meetings and it goes over my head, mostly. Just put me in a truck, but anyway.
In 2014, Jay purchases Pride Transportation from his father.
My 5 daughters, of course, I think every one of them at one time worked for Pride. even though now I have 3 of my daughters involved. Lindsay is our HR person, and Sonny. We just have the 2 daughters now working here for us. I have 2 son-in-laws as well. The kids have been great.
The other Englands are on shifting ground as well. They need to make a succession plan.
As you go into succeeding generations after that first one, there are new dynamics.
The England family has expanded massively since Chester's first Model T, and company ownership is spread thin among Dan and his brothers Dean, Todd, and Corey.
So we decided that there really should be just one succeeding family in the business. In the case of the prior generation, my dad was the succeeding family. It made most sense because he had all of his sons working in the business, and my uncle didn't. He had daughters. They had worked in the business when they were young. That set a model for what happened in my generation as my brothers and I have worked together to ensure the future success of the company. I have 4 sons, and they were all working in the business, had been working in it for a long time. And so it just made more sense for me and my sons to be the succeeding family. And my brothers agreed with that. And so we were, in 2012, we were able to enter into an agreement where over a lot of years, we would buy out their interest. And not only has it provided stable, capable leadership for the company, but perhaps even more importantly, it has allowed for the continuation of harmony in the family. You do this to succeed at that and to make that good. That's something that we all seek after.
In Arizona, a combination of time and immense respect allow past wounds to heal between the Knights and the Moyes families. The Knights approached Swift Transportation with an offer for a merger. At this point, Swift is approximately 3.5 times larger than the quickly growing and highly profitable Knight Transportation. Swift and Knight create a merger in 2017, which substantially increases their size, scope, and profitability, becoming the largest truckload carrier in the world. The Englands, Knights, and Moyses continue to collaborate. Gary, Keith, and Kevin Knight, Jeff England, Dan England, and Jerry Moyes remain close friends.
You just can't even express gratitude for the people that have helped us, along the way. And our families too. Our families have had to sacrifice a lot, because there's a lot of, you spend a lot of time at work and even at home a lot, because trucks never stop.
And I couldn't be more proud of the people that really run this business today.
A positive person that sees things as being a challenge that allows you to improve your prospects and to use your mentality to improve things for your family and for others. And then when you get an operation like this, the other day I was down here, and here comes a man down the corridor that had just retired that day after 36 years with the company. And what a pleasure it is to shake his hand and tell him how much you appreciated him. And that's what a company is. It's people that work together and put their efforts in to make the thing grow and serve a service for the nation. And And that's where so much happiness comes out of a project like this.
Here today, and you walk into this phenomenal building, and we have all these trucks and all these employees. I wish they all could have experienced 2 or 3 or 4 years like we were blessed with in the early parts of their careers. I wouldn't trade those initial years for anything. The American dream to me is living in a place where you can do what our family was able to do, where you have freedom, where you have thought, where you have an opportunity to learn something and to create something and continue to make it better. We're so blessed to live in such a wonderful country where we can be and accomplish the things that we choose to accomplish and be accountable for it. And not rely on a government that tells us what we have to do and when we have to do it. So really, all of this really started with C.R. England, with Chester, with Mr. England, however you want to address him. That's where it all started. And as I look at going beyond C.R. England, it's just one continuum. And that continuum is the England family, it's the Moyes family, it's the Knight family, and it's all the people that work at those businesses. And it had to start somewhere, and where it started was with Chester, C.R. England.
Boys in a trucking company, how could you lose? I mean, he had a mother, June, she was a trainer, she was everything.
Yeah.
And she made men out of these guys, in spite of me. Yes, it was just something you couldn't believe. And I was so pleased they always wanted to be down here with me. And when we could make trips, we made trips, and yes, it was wonderful. Well, if we can enjoy life the way it plays for us, how wonderful it is. And then if you can get a little extra, like an extra 20 years on it, that makes it that much better.
20 and counting, right?
You know,
Well,
when he turned 100, I asked him if he wanted us to start working on his next, 101.
Yeah.
He says, no, let's just wait till 105.
yeah.
So.
We don't want to interrupt those small
Yeah, yeah.
moments. We want to get
Those are insignificant.